Hi, so I will be doing a portfolio critique on your traditional and digital animation demo reel. How this is going to work is I'm going to go over some general comments, stuff that I've seen to be true throughout the entire film, and then I'll jump into some more specifics regarding specific pieces, details and stuff I talked about earlier on in the general section, and so on and so forth. So let's jump right into it. First of all, I want to say that I think you're off to a great start for having just started animating. You said in your artist statement that you started animating in the fall of 2016, and I think that you are showing a lot of natural talent, enthusiasm, a lot of exploration, and just general excitement for animation and the medium that it is. So I think that's a great place to be a year into animating and looking into the future. I just mentioned that you are exploring various media. Right now I'm seeing a lot of traditional hand-drawn 2D animation and digital 2D animation, which I think is really great. And I would encourage you to continue exploring various ways of approaching animation. For example, what can After Effects or stop motion do for you? You could work in the format of just simple shapes or something in After Effects, and then in stop motion you can explore with puppets, or you could explore with clay. There's a bunch of different options, and that being said, not necessarily for your demo reel, but just a way of enhancing your abilities and just trying out new things. And you're at a point where you're clearly very good at movement and timing in hand-drawn animation, so if it does happen that you're successful in other media, putting this in your demo reel can show versatility and just enthusiasm and eagerness to explore. It could also open up a door of doing, not collage is the right word, but like integrating multiple media into the same film. As I look through this, everything except for this piece with this wolf-like bear character kind of sticks to the same aesthetic throughout, and it would be really cool to see more of this where the visuals change, and you could even try, this is all digital, but you could even try hand-drawn with digital, stop motion with digital, so on and so forth. Moving on, some areas that I think you can work on in general are color and the environments and backgrounds. What I mean by that, and I'll go into further detail, is that you are exploring color, but I think that it works better in some areas than others, and we can talk a little bit about in a couple of seconds how you can easily find a solution to work on color and work on background so that it's not tedious and is already utilizing the skills you already have, but makes it more interesting and dynamic for viewers. Another area I think you could work on is character design. Like I said earlier, it's working way better in some areas than other areas, but I think there are some things we could talk about what's working and what's not, so we'll get into that in a little bit. And finally, I think that structuring your reel is something that could also be worked upon. I'll go into further detail, but just something that I have noticed in general in demo reels is that having a very strong beginning, a really strong middle, and a very strong end is really important. And so let's just jump right into structuring the reel and start from the beginning and then go into the more detailed critique. So to start right off, one thing that I noticed that you could really benefit from is having a title card and an end card. And what that means is you want something in the beginning, the first thing that you see, to be a kind of identifier of who you are. So you want your name and your contact information. It could be as simple or as complicated as you want, but you really want it to be concise and clean for the people that you're sending this out to, who are probably employers or internship coordinators, whoever it may be. And I noticed in the beginning you have this wonderful opening burst right there. And I think that this would be a great spot to, instead of going into your reel immediately, to have your name. So what I mean exactly by title card is to have your full name and the easiest way to get a hold of you. So this could be all or a combination of your email address, your website, your phone number, just one of those things, all three of those things, but definitely a way of getting in contact with you so that it's in the reel itself and employers or whoever it may be that's looking at this reel doesn't have to go digging to figure out whose reel this is and how do I get in touch with them if I'm interested in speaking to them about something. And you want the same thing to appear at the very end. So it could be a blank screen like this. You could do like a closing burst and have it show up like that. Totally up to you. It could be decorated, it could be animated, it could just be like a text, still text, whatever you want. But as long as that information is there, I think it's really important for employers to see that and have that available to them. Moving on, going back to the beginning, you want your first, I would say 10 or 15 seconds of your demo reel to be some of your strongest work, because you want to start off with a bang. That's what the person is going to see right off the bat. And if you put yourself in the shoes of whoever is looking at your demo reel, they probably have seen so many reels or are about to see so many reels, and you really just want to captivate them from the beginning. So I would actually suggest picking a scene out that really showcases what you're interested in showing through this demo reel, if that makes any sense. For example, in your artist statement, you talk about how movement is a big driving force in what inspires you to animate. And this baseball scene is in the beginning, but I would actually start off with it because it has some really dynamic and interesting characters. Like this character, for example, is very nicely put together, created. This character has a lot of emotion, this character as well, and you're also paying attention to the background really nicely. And then there's this wonderful camera movement where we swivel around and focus in on our main character, who we discover is this guy, and then there's some nice movement there too. And it's very anticipatory of like something is about to happen, which I think is a great way to lead into a demo reel. So I would consider putting this first, or putting something in that has this kind of anticipatory feeling to it, because not only is a demo reel there to showcase your skills as an animator, but it can also showcase your skills as an editor by kind of splicing together these seemingly unrelated clips in an interesting way that shows some sort of narrative arc. And I think starting with something that's really anticipatory is a great way of being like, here's the beginning, get ready, pay attention, and like stay with me. So I would consider putting that in the beginning. And you also want to have something interesting in the middle, kind of like a climax. I found that this piece right here was a good piece to have for the middle because it is kind of a shift in what you're able to do. I wonder if you have anything more that's kind of in this style, because I would like to see it dispersed out throughout the film, like more examples, but I wouldn't want you to cut up this piece because I think it's a good length. Something that I think we should mention is, in my personal experience having people look at my demo reel, I've noticed that unless they are doing you a favor and like engaging with you in a critique of your demo reel, a lot of times people will start watching it, watch just a little bit, like 5 to 10 seconds, and do this. They click somewhere else, and they click 10 seconds forward, and they watch another 5 seconds, and then they click over there, move on, and then you'll find themselves like 10 seconds from the end and just watch a little bit. So you really want to start off and end with a bang, because I've noticed that the areas that people will watch the most of are the first couple of seconds and the last couple of seconds. And so I was actually going to suggest that it might be nice to go back to the baseball scene for the end to kind of tie things together. And I'm trying to remember if it's this scene that I was thinking about. Maybe it's this one. Yes. I actually think this is a great scene to end with, because this going up into the sky is so, it reminds me a lot of a conclusion or an ending, and it's kind of like we're now going up into the sky and we are done. So I think that this might be a good place to end the film on, and it also is a very, very interesting piece. You have a lot of dynamic movement, really great camera angles, you're exaggerating for shortening, the way you're tending to the audience is really interesting in your mark making. So I would consider making that your end piece, just something to think about. And so yeah, really think about how you can structure your demo reel in a way that captivates your audience and forces them or really encourages them to sit through the entire thing. Moving on, editing scenes together is something I mentioned earlier about how editing together these different sections of your films could showcase another skill set that you have of like graphic match cutting or visual editing, how you match cut basically similar scenes together that are actually unrelated. And I mentioned that a little bit about like, you know, a starting scene and an end scene, but this scene with the footstep right here, and then it cuts to this walk cycle, I think that could be an interesting area to do that too if you were to flip either one of the scenes so that they're walking in the same direction. It could allude, although we all know that it's from two different films because the shoes aren't exactly the same and the pace is a little different, it still shows that you're thinking about editing, and it's kind of like a really close-up shot that zooms out and is now like a long shot. So something to think about for editing, and it's a really simple edit to make in your process of editing your demo reels. So that's something to think about. And also, you are at 2.5 minutes, about 2.5 minutes for your demo reel, which isn't bad, but I would say that having a 2-minute max demo reel is ideal, and having it under 2 minutes in like the 1-minute range would actually be preferable. 2.5 minutes isn't bad, but there are some things that I think you could do to fine-tune what you have in there. Like for example, this scene right here, after the text cuts out, let's start that scene from the beginning right here. This part is really great because it's showing your ability to do timing of like a computer generated thing really effectively. But then when it cuts out over here and the white goes to that, it goes white and then it goes to this scene, I don't think that's giving us anything as viewers. I'm not really getting anything out of that, so I would just say cut right there. And although it's only like 1 second, it still shaves off a second. And if you could go through your demo reel and find other things like that, which aren't as necessary, you could shave off a couple seconds. Like even this blue right here, you could take out. And I think that could, even if it's 10 seconds, just shorten the amount of time that people are watching it, because like I said, the people who are watching your demo reel have definitely watched so many, and the shorter the sweeter the better it is. So I'm going to move on to talk about color right now. Like I said in my general comments, some areas are working a lot better than others. I think this film that you have spliced throughout the whole demo reel is doing some really interesting things with colors, and I think it's really successful and moving in a right direction. You're working digitally in this piece, which one thing that I always try and think about for animators is why are you working digitally versus traditionally versus in stop motion? Like, what is that medium doing for you? And a lot of times digital animation, I find one of the pros is that it gives you access to so many colors, which is really, really important. It's a very important thing that digital animation gives you access to, and something that I think should be thought about when you're animating digitally. And I see you utilizing it here because you have a wide array of colors. The way you're tending to lighting is working really well. You have a really interesting color palette, and it's very exciting to see that, and I would encourage you to push that. Another thing that digital animation gives you is, especially if you're working in Photoshop, which I think that you might be, it gives you access to a lot of brushes and the ability to create your own brushes, buy brushes, so on and so forth. And I like how you have, how do I say, like a kind of a chalky brush going on here. It almost looks like chalk or like a very dry paint. And I would encourage you to push what brushes you're using, because it looks like you're not tapping into the wide variety of brushes that you have accessible to you. And since you're, you know, like you said in your artist statement, you're fresh to animating, why not just throw in all of the brushes in a test and see what works better for animation than what than the others? And so that would be my comment on this piece specifically. An area that I think that color isn't working that great is this other digital piece, this one and this one. My issues with this one is that the background can, I feel like backgrounds are often not tended to as much as the foreground and the main content is. And in this piece, I find that the background is actually distracting me, especially because the colors kind of change between these two scenes. And I understand that it's kind of like a weird surrealist space that these people are inhabiting, but I find that the background is distracting me more than adding to the piece. So I would encourage you to maybe put in a blank background, try just a flat color, or try some light washes of something that could allude to what might be in the background. In this end piece, I think you're doing color really nicely over here about how like time is changing. This is very, very impressive, and I like how in this section over here, there's not a lot of detail. It's very subtle, but you are hinting to there being a closet, and I think you could benefit from that in some of your other digital pieces. And like I said, digital animation gives you access to so many color, so many brushes, so many line weights, and I would really encourage you to play with thickness. Like in this piece, you could really emphasize that this is a drawing and this is a hand, and they're two completely different materials by line weight, and showing what does thickness mean in relation to texture, and how does more details express what is skin versus what is paper. So think about that a little bit. And moving on, we spoke about backgrounds a little bit, but I wanted to mention that in the baseball scene, I think that you have some really, really wonderful backgrounds, and I think that you should take what you've done in these pieces and kind of integrate them into some of your other animation techniques, especially the digital ones. Even in this scene where the clouds are really kind of, they have a lot of action to them, but they look quickly done, they're working really, really nicely and creating a lot of dynamic space. Like that swooshing that just happened was really wonderful. And I think that there's another spot here where it's so subtle, but there's this curve that alludes to the fact that there is a stadium there, and those might be people or barbed wire, who knows, but it's still giving us depth and space. And I like how you cut in and out of having it there. Like there's some scenes that don't have it there, but I think that the majority of the time there is a background, and it's really helping create a sense of space and make the movement that much more interesting. So I'm looking for this one scene where the audience is, oh yeah, there we go. So this scene where you like float up into the sky, it's so nicely done, and there's a lot of energy in your mark making. But yeah, so I would think about how you can tend to backgrounds more in a simple way. It doesn't have to be complicated, but in a way that could redefine your space and make it way more engaging to look at, which I think is an important thing to do as an animator, is to consider all your elements rather than just your main characters. Going back to your artist statement and movement, I just wanted to quickly talk about your ability to address movement, and I think that's one of your most successful parts of your your animation demo reel. You have a great sense of weight, like this, with this huge heavy baby, and your timing is really great too. Like everything is very believable, even though it's exaggerated, it's very, very believable. I would encourage you to try different walk cycles, because walk cycles are very, very hard to do, and you have two very successful ones, this one and this one, but they both are very erect postures and are similar walk cycles. Although they're different speeds, the body movement is kind of similar, and I would be interested to see how this guy walks, because he has such a hunch, and this baby, how they walk, and really trying different walk cycles or different movements. Walk cycles are a great starting point, but you could try this orangutan that you have moving around is wonderful and so spinny, and the way you attend to the rope and stuff. I would encourage you to try more of these things and try to break free from the typical walk cycle of some like very erect spine walking fast, and try like, how would someone who's very sleepy walk? How would someone who is bouncing off the walls would walk? Maybe they wouldn't even walk. So try a couple of those things. Speaking about character design, you have a really good sense of expressions. There's a scene that's coming up here that's really impressive of how her face is lit up at first and happy, then her face literally falls and you can see the worry in her face, and then it goes to this fake smile. And I would encourage you to continue working on how you tap into emotions and express things non-verbally, but through body movements. I would encourage you to work a little bit on your character design, though. Although the expressions are working well, I think that you could make them even more interesting by developing your characters. In this opening scene, you have these two really simple characters, this one and this one, but their faces are so interesting, like these lumpy neck rolls, this huge nose, the way that this character chews its gum. Where did it go? There it is. The way that this character chews its gum, it's so like sticky and gross, and I can really feel his skin on his face, and I think those are some really successful character designs. But when it comes to this digital one of these two hugging, and even in the baseball scene with these characters that have the hats on, like once the game has started to play, it's really hard to differentiate each character from the other. So try and tap into how you could really exaggerate some of your characters' facial features and stuff. One tip that a teacher once gave me was, if you're playing around with making character designs, take a body part, like a nose, and draw it, and then multiply it by 3. And just keep doing that for specific pieces and see what happens. Just totally exaggerate things. And I think that could really help you tap into creating very, very unique characters. I was actually going back to this walk cycle over here. I was thinking this would be a really interesting baseball player. Like, how would someone play baseball with this huge hip butt area? And that would also be a really great way of differentiating characters from one another, because when we get into some of the shots in the baseball scene, like here, where there's so many characters and there's so much happening, it's really hard to tell who's who, especially for someone who like doesn't know anything about baseball like myself. Another thing that I thought about is that color could help you with differentiating characters, going back to color, especially in this baseball scene, because there's so many teams. I mean, there are 2 teams, but there's so many people playing. And there's a film that I wanted to mention called Velodrome by this animator called Sander June. It's on Vimeo, and it's a biking film. It's about a bike race, so it's a similar sports theme. And visually, it's mixed media, but it has a similar pencil aesthetic to this baseball film. And it uses color to differentiate the bikers in like the very wide shots where you can barely like see any facial features. But I think it's very successful, and it taps into using mixed media, digital with traditional in a way that I think could really, really inspire you. So that's something that I think that you should look into. I wanted to mention that the color in this scene is very, very exciting, and it's not only beautiful, but it's also tapping into the mental state of this person, like the way that it changes as he starts to touch himself and as he closes his eyes and moves his head. And I think it's a very good direction to continue exploring. And especially here is a similar change in color, but it's expressing a change in time of day. Whereas this one I think is so interesting because it's expressing a change in like psyche. So this is very, very successful, and I think that you should continue working with color in this kind of realm rather than these like muted tones, because I think they're working a lot better when you let yourself just be free. I was thinking about the way you use color in a way that you are exploring movement and just like pushing and exaggerating everything. Like push your character design, push your color, and just let loose, because as an early stage animator, you literally have nothing to lose. So keep doing that. I've thought a couple of things that you could think about adding into your demo reel. If you have anything that has lip sync in it, I think that would be good to put in here because you have a lot of animation tests like the walk cycle and whatnot, but a lip sync would be great. And I do have the sound off on your film, but I noticed that you put a music track over it, which is great and pretty like basic for a demo reel. But oftentimes the people who are looking at the demo reel will just turn off the sound completely like I have right now. But I have noticed that if they see a lip sync, they will turn the sound back on because I've seen many people's demo reels where they, instead of playing the music over the lip sync, which obviously wouldn't make any sense, they just dip the sound out and bring in the sound of the lip sync. And the reason I think a lip sync would be great is because you could really develop a character with found sound or a recording that you've made on your own. And it could be like a completely different person than the person who actually narrated the sound. And you can not only show that you're able to move lips with words, but you're able to show mannerisms, like body movements and stuff, with what, like in conjunction with what they're saying, which is a very, very useful skill and something that you should practice doing. And I think that if you're successful, it would be a great addition to your demo reel. I'd also love to see you incorporate more mixed media. I know I talked about trying out different animation techniques, but there is one clip in your reel that is of a stocking being put on a leg. There it is. And it looks like you incorporated some sort of like photography or After Effects or video work. I don't know what it is, but it's this is such a captivating piece, like in everything that is very uniform in its aesthetic within each film, and then having this pop in and be like, whoa, look, it's digital, but then there's also this like photography or whatever incorporated. It shows a lot about like your thinking, and is really exciting to see. Like mixed media is so interesting and fun, and shows that you're exploring, and I would encourage you to continue exploring that. Not only animation techniques, but photography, video. You could try doing video with animation, such as like rotoscoping techniques, which is like drawing over video, so it has this like very uncanny, almost realistic movement to it. And since you're interested in movement, doing rotoscoping could teach you a lot because you're literally going over actual life movement, and then from that you can figure out how to exaggerate or minimize on it or whatever. But I found personally that rotoscoping has taught me a lot about movement. Also, you have some animation tests in here like this, the picking up the heavy object, the walk cycle. You also have a jello thing dropping, which reminds me of the ball bounce. This piece right here of the jello dropping, it reminds me of the classic ball bounce that we all get assigned when we're in Animation 1. And I think that you could try incorporating a couple more animation tests, especially because this is a demo reel of like a first-year animation student. It's not uncommon to see demo reels. But instead of doing, which you are doing already, so good job, but instead of doing the classic ball bounce, here you've done jello, which is showing something personal to you as an artist, something that you're interested in, which I think is very important. And you don't have to use a ball. Like you could do the ball bounce, but then you could move on from there and try something similar, but make it personal to you. It's like when you're doing a still life, you don't have to do a still life of pears and apples. You could do a still life of objects that have meaning to you or that you find funny or interesting or visually cool. It doesn't matter. So you could try the flour sack animation, where it's like you give a flour sack a walk cycle and like some personality. But you could, I don't know, if you don't want to do a flour sack, you could do a barrel of gunpowder that suddenly has a lot of movable parts or is really able to squeeze and stretch. I don't know, something that you find interesting that has similar qualities to the flour sack but isn't necessarily that in itself. And what else? There's also the feather falling and the morph. Those are two very basic animation tests, the feather falling being like a very light feather fluttering down onto the floor, but instead of the feather you could choose whatever light object or a series of objects of all different weights that are like interesting objects to you. And the morph is actually so interesting because you could literally choose any two objects and morph one to the other. And it's always such a pleasure to see, but also the two objects you choose could be very telling of who you are as an artist. Also, I wanted to talk very briefly about sound design. I watched your baseball film in its entirety on your Vimeo page, and I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed your sound design, but I would encourage you to play around with creating a sound design that is original to you, not meaning that you have to create every sound, but rather than using stuff like music, because I found that the music that was playing over the baseball film was really distracting and kind of took away from the film and was definitely not needed. But rather than just using this music as music itself, pull the music and figure out how you can incorporate it into your own sound design. Figure out where in this baseball stadium the music is coming from and make it an environmental element, like you have with the footsteps and with the whooshing noises that happens when the batter picks up the bat, wherever this part, there was a really nice whooshing sound that came when the bat went up. And so pick a place where the sound is in. Is it in the concession stand? Is it where the audience is? Is it coming out of someone's headphones? And that way the music can come in and out rather than being a constant over the whole film. And I think that would also help with creating space, creating dynamic movement through audio. And I have this reference that I call the cookie reference. And when I think of sound design, I think of buying store-bought cookies versus making your own cookies. And obviously both are going to be very, very delicious, but the homemade cookies are probably going to be just a little bit better because you get to tailor make the cookies for your personal taste. And think of each ingredient like each element of sound, and then putting it all together and making everything work perfectly so it's the best cookie in the world for you. And in this case, it's the best sound in the world for your animation. So that would be my suggestion for sound design. Obviously not for a demo reel, because often there's no sound in the demo reel, it's just music over the whole thing, since they're focusing on just your animation skills. But sound design is really important, and sound is a huge part of film, so it's definitely something that shouldn't be overlooked. And so just a couple of random little things that popped into my head. This film right here reminded me of a film by an artist called Jamie Wolfe. The film's name is Roommates, and I think that you have a lot of great camera movement, and this swooshing part where he becomes like, yeah, right there, reminds me of how she tends to her characters, and it reminds me of movement and morphs and how you could work with both together and what you could create with both of them together, and how morphing can exaggerate movements. What I'm tapping into is I really want you to push all these things that you're already you're already delving into, like movement, sound design, color, whatever, backgrounds, whatever. But I really want you to be unafraid and jump into it with like no restrictions, just push. And I think that this shows that you can morph into these blobs. But what if this character just came into the screen with limbs that were huge and gloopy? That's the wonderful thing about animation. Nothing has to be realistic. That's what it allows you to do. Also, one last thing is that I would say that I'm assuming that you give this to your employers or whoever is looking at your reel through a Vimeo link, or if you ever do, I would suggest in the description of the Vimeo video to have the name of the music, so you're giving credit to the person who made the music that's over the demo reel, as well as a list of the names of the films that you see in the demo reel. It's going to be hard to put it in order, but you could just do it in, like, this would be the first one, then this one, then the baseball film, then this one, and then if it at any point it repeats, and you don't have to do these small tests because they're saying the entirety, but if at any point it repeats, you don't have to mention it again, just move on to the next new one. Just so, oh, you could also do it by time code and say the time code, like this one is from second 30 to 32 or whatever. But that's just so that if someone is looking at your demo reel and is like, wow, this baseball film is really interesting, I want to see more of it, and I want to see how they created a narrative and what the narrative is, they could go find it by the name. So just to recap of everything we've talked about, I think you're doing a really great work of exploring movement, diving into animation, and just being a very, very confident artist and animator. I would encourage you to look at the things I discussed in this critique and develop further stuff like your character design. How can you make your characters so unique to you as an artist, and exaggerate, explore character designs and make everything very, very unique to who you are as an artist. Figure out where you stand with color. Again, push all the possibilities with color, but find out what works for you and how to create interesting backgrounds that don't seem like last-minute resorts, but rather very intentional backgrounds that add to the film and add to the piece in an interesting way. And just structuring your reel. Have an interesting beginning, middle, and end. Start with a bang, end with bang, and try and cut things down if they aren't absolutely necessary. This has to be the best of your work. So make sure it is that and nothing else. And just keep exploring. I think you're at a great place for where you are, and exploring is the best thing that you can do. Try new mediums out. Keep pushing how you're exploring movements, and since that seems to be the thing you're really, really passionate about. And figure out what gets you excited, because animation is such an exciting medium that has endless possibilities. So great work, and I can't wait to see where you go from this.